This film is just about a break-in over the Christmas period. Nothing else. Don't think about it too much. So, better watch out. This is an interesting one. It's also kind of a hard one to talk about without giving spoilers, because I don't want to say it does a full Dusk Till Dawn, but it certainly sets itself up as one thing and turns out very much to not be that thing. So I'm going to give you the lowdown up to a certain point, and then I'm going to give you the option to close the video and come back later for the standard full breakdown and analysis stuff you watch these videos for. I assume that's what you watch them for anyway. I don't know, maybe you're just thirsty for skeletons, or maybe you hate watching. Whatever floats your boat, it's still a view for me. I will say though, before I get started, just in case you do dip off to watch this movie, possible content warning on this one, which probably seems odd considering I didn't give that with either of the previous movies I covered this season, one of which featured a murderous Santa Claus going through an emotional breakdown, and the other featured the systematic murder of an entire sorority. But I do feel like it's pretty obvious what you're getting into with either of those films, and their violence is very, film-like. It kind of exists on like that hyper-exaggerated plane of movie slashers. Not that many people are going to have had run-ins with a murderous Santa, for example. Whereas Better Watch Out, while far more breezy in its delivery and tone, certainly has moments in it where a very specific type of violence occurs, and some very specific scenarios that may just catch you off guard and make you uncomfortable. I'd say more, but it's kind of annoying in that to give you the exact type of content warning you might need for this one would also potentially spoil where the movie is going to unexpectedly go or what it's trying to do. So if you're hearing this and thinking it might be something you'd be concerned about, I'd maybe suggest you check out its listing on doesthedogdie.com, which is a site that will give you a broken down list of all the stuff that might upset anyone in as spoiler-free context as possible. Just something to be aware of. I feel like I may be stressing this so much that I'm giving an extremely inaccurate picture of what this movie is. It's not like super dark or anything. I mean, it sorta is, but it's also kind of fun? I don't know, it's a real weird one. I'm just saying don't think this is going to be like a Christmas version of Hostel or Saw or some such things, because it's really not. I will say though, it does have a fucking horrifying spider. I hate spiders, and the single most affected I have ever been by a jump scare in any film ever was this one's involving a spider. Horrid. You've been warned. So anyway, Better Watch Out, which was formerly titled Safe Neighborhood, what is it with these Christmas horror films all having multiple names, is a 2016 movie directed by Chris Peckover with a screenplay by him and Zach Kahn. The plot follows 17-year-old Ashley, portrayed by Olivia Jung, who is babysitting 12-year-old Luke, portrayed by Levi Miller, one night over the Christmas period. Everything plays out like a very basic light romp at first. Lots of tropes you're extremely familiar with. The babysitter's boyfriend is trying to come over when the kid's asleep. Luke has a super big crush on his babysitter. Luke's friend Gareth mocks him, saying he'll never have a chance with her. And tonight, on her last night of babysitting, Luke plans to make his big move. Cue some light banter and some incredibly cringy interactions between the two as Luke tries his best and most awkward impression of someone cool and mature, which of course is followed by his immediate rejection. As the two settle in to watch a movie for the night, strange occurrences start to happen around the house. Noises outside and someone watching them from the windows, but the whole thing appears to just be Luke's obnoxious friend Garrett messing with them for a prank. Or is it? The horror of the film properly kicks in when, with Garrett in front of them both, there's suddenly the noise of a window smashing upstairs, and upon investigation, the group find a brick that has been thrown into the house with the words, "You leave, you die," scrawled upon it. A panicked Garrett flees, only to be instantly shot by an unseen attacker, showing these mysterious intruders aren't messing around, and leaving the 17-year-old babysitter and the 12-year-old child alone in the dark in this big house, unable to leave, and all the while being stalked by this unknown sinister presence with violent intent. The phones are down, the Wi-Fi is off, and everything looks very, very bleak. You can turn off this video now if this seems like something you might want to check out. However, if you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen it, well, stick around, because things are about to take a turn. After a few more scary run-ins as the two kids try their best to hide and survive, including some more spider scares, god damn, this film has so many spiders, Luke decides this is it, there's been enough hiding. It's time to get his daddy's gun and be a hero. But that's when Ashley notices something weird and recognises the ski mask the gun-wielding maniac in the house is wearing. You see, that intruder is Luke's friend Garrett. In his infinite intelligence, Luke decided to stage a break-in so he could then stage saving the day, in the delusional hope that Ashley would be so grateful she'd presumably suddenly be super into this literal child. Of course, that's not what happens. Ashley does not find this whole scenario charming and is rightfully furious at the little shit for his pathetic antics, and screams at him before storming off when, holy shit, Luke, in a huge mask-off moment, slaps her in the face so hard she falls down the stairs and ends up unconscious. When she awakes, she finds herself duct-taped to a chair in the kitchen. Luke, who again, may I remind you, is 12 years old, stood over her with a smarmy, shit-eating grin, and the rest of the film sees him pushing further and further in seeing what he can get away with, and as the violence increases and the moral quality of the night decreases, tensions rise as Ashley makes repeated attempts to escape, Garrett gets more and more reluctant to carry on with the night, and Luke grows more and more unhinged. This film is a movie that brilliantly evokes the spirit of a classic horror monster. Not a vampire, not a werewolf, not zombies, an incel. This is incel horror. It is the horror of when entitlement meets misogyny, all captured perfectly in the form of one of the people most likely to become radicalized by those ideas, a 12-year-old boy. Luke is awful, just in every way. Not only is he gross, violent, and wildly possessive and entitled, he's also horribly pathetic, but sees himself as the coolest person in the room at any time. When I watched this film with my partner, she really did not vibe with it, and Luke was the main reason as to why. And I get it. I totally get it. This film is not going to be for everyone, and Luke is going to be a major factor in how much you can enjoy it. It wasn't even the misogyny and violence that bothered her, it was specifically him, his performance, that character, the way he carried himself, the way he talked, just everything about him. She didn't find him threatening, she found him horribly annoying. And I do not begrudge anyone for this, because I also think he is wildly annoying. I get it. The moment in the film where the slap happens and Luke's true character is revealed will probably be the deciding point for a lot of people as to whether they stick with this one. As up till that moment, which is about the first 30 minutes, the film is kind of a big nothing. It's not offensive, it's not great, it's just sort of there. There's a little peak of interest when the fake intruder starts to show up, but it's not like chillingly effective horror or super engaging or anything. It's just a totally okay watch. It is there for a very specific purpose, both as a misdirect as well as a means of foreshadowing Luke's true character. But it ultimately isn't going to be the part that gives anyone a definitive thing to cling on to and get excited about, or a reason to stick around. But at the moment the slap happens, Luke, who by this point you probably already think is really, really cringy from his attempts at flirting, only gets so much worse. You might have, like I did, kind of put those cringy, awkward and uncomfortable qualities shown early on in the film down to him being a 12-year-old at the start of his character arc, and had the expectancy that the events of the film would make him grow and become more tolerable throughout the narrative. Like, the obvious story here would have been having him pretend to be a man, as he does, showing off early on in the movie to impress Ashley by drinking alcohol and being shitty because that's what he thinks is cool and manly and impressive, only to have to actually become a man when he's confronted with a very sudden and very real danger that could see him in situations where he's responsible for protecting others' lives. Shedding this immature conception that being a man is to be dismissive and shitty and entitled and cool, and instead realizing that there's a greater execution of masculinity in being responsible for and protecting others in danger. But instead, they subvert that expected narrative and actually double down on all those slightly incel vibes he's been putting out, and he just goes full on creep, becoming even more cringy and intolerable in the process. And yeah, I can't blame anyone for not wanting to sit through another hour or so with this fucking loser. But for me, that's also the reason I found him so goddamn compelling. Luke is a 12-year-old's idea of what a cool, hard, in-control alpha male should be. He's a worm pretending to be a lion. His performance is like a really bad cosplay of Patrick Bateman and the Joker rolled into one. He's a kid performing masculinity, when his only idea of masculinity comes from a diet of red pill forums, internet pickup artists and misreading movies like Fight Club, Wolf of Wall Street, and Scarface. He fucking sucks. But it's this borderline unbearable quality to his character that makes him so brilliant. There's such a great element to Levi's acting, especially for a performer as young as he is, in that the performance feels like a performance, right? Like he's doing this really clever thing where he's acting. He's not so menacing that I totally buy into this kid as some kind of sick, twisted, evil mastermind. I'm not shocked or threatened by him and in stunned disbelief that Miller is so good in the role that I'm buying into the idea that this 12-year-old is a terrifying, manipulative psychopath. On the contrary, he's playing him as pathetic. He's playing Luke like the kid who definitely thinks he's those things and plays it up. But it's so transparently false that the only person he's fooling with this shtick is himself. It's such a realistic depiction of a 12-year-old edgelord, radicalized on a hatred of women and an entitlement to their bodies that it's uncomfortable to watch. However, not for the reasons that Luke, the character, wants you to be uncomfortable. Luke would like you to be scared of him. And he is scary, but not for the reasons he thinks he is. Luke wants to come across as dangerous. And he is dangerous, but again, not for the reasons he thinks he is. You see, he thinks he's mysterious because he's so in control, enigmatic and mysterious, like a kind of violent James Dean type, when really, he's scary and dangerous because he's a temperamental 12-year-old hyped up on bad ideas and adrenaline while holding a gun. He's scary in the same way a baby with a knife is scary. Like, whoa, okay, put that down. You don't know what you're doing with that. The film is so good at encapsulating this duality between the facade the 12-year-old boy wants to present and the actual 12-year-old boy underneath it. As the film goes on, Luke invites Ashley's boyfriend to the house in an effort to dispose of him. Another act motivated by this kind of incel logic that perpetuates the character's rationale is when he monologues his reasons for disliking Ashley's boyfriend enough to do this. It's filled with this sort of nice guy rhetoric you've definitely heard before. Lots of lines like, you can have any guy you want and keep choosing these douchebags, stuff like that. And it's great that Luke seemingly positions himself as the alternative to these so-called assholes, while also tying the girl he's lecturing to a chair after knocking her unconscious. Very much capturing the lack of self-awareness the people who perpetuate this kind of nonsense often have. And during an attack on Ashley's boyfriend Ricky with a baseball bat, Luke immediately follows up his act of violence with a little dance, like he's doing his best impression of Mr. Blonde in Reservoir Dogs, only it's slightly awkward and bumbling and lacking in confidence in his movement, but sold in a way where you get the idea that in spite of what you can see, Luke is really feeling himself. However, this all drops in an instant when he realizes his potential victim hasn't been knocked out, and he immediately reverts into what he really is, a scared and panicked little boy who is only able to get out of this encounter not by virtue of some genius level IQ he perceives himself to have, but by his friend Gareth saving him through threatening Ricky with a gun, only for Luke to revert immediately back to his edgy cool persona once he realizes he's safe, going so far as to utter a smarmy little quip as he hits Ricky again from behind, as if to give the illusion that he totally had everything under control all along. It's an illusion no one is buying. There's so many moments throughout the movie where they totally nail this characterization. Whether it's through his bad Reddit-esque monologues delivered like he's some kind of Bond villain unveiling his master plan, his remarks about how he has it all under control, only to be immediately followed by his voice breaking as he screeches and loses it in that way only a boy on the cusp of puberty's voice can, or his big dastardly plans and ultimate goals being so profoundly juvenile at their core. Like, for example, one of the ways he plans to off Ashley's boyfriend is to Home Alone him by hitting him in the head with a paint can on a rope so that he can win an argument with Garrett as to whether such an act would kill a man. And if you feel like I'm yammering on about this kid for most of this video, that's because his whole shtick is the movie. This is its entire crux, this is its whole strength, and if you find him too irritating, its main weakness. It's very small in scope, entirely set in one location, and carried almost completely by the performances of this unbearable little shit being the perfect epitome of an Andrew Tate fan, while an unfortunate babysitter does her best to survive his unpredictable shitty behaviour and ego. And personally, I find that massively compelling. It feels like such a laser-tight, focused look at this very particular brand of toxic masculinity that surfaced with the advent of the internet and the rising popularity of message boards, pickup artists, and red pill ideology. And a lot of films these days deal with this kind of misogyny. But here it's so terrifying because we're seeing it manifest in a literal child. A child who does some genuinely fucked up and uncomfortable things throughout this movie's runtime, all the while feeling like he's imitating a learned behaviour. And that's what's really scary, because that's real. I've seen this stuff firsthand. There's things this kid says in this movie that released 6 years ago that sound almost word for word like bad Reddit posts I could have read yesterday. And make no mistake, kids this age are engaging with this kind of content and taking in its messaging. And somehow, this film is the first I've seen to really talk about that, besides the little joke about the Nazi child in Knives Out. And it manages to examine this really quite pertinent subject matter, all under the guise of a fun Christmas-themed horror movie. Again, I feel like I'm really selling this movie as super dark, but I want to reiterate, it's not. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's peppered with jokes, its kills are schlocky and silly, and the main villain himself is hard to take seriously, which is kind of a really bold move for a horror movie, because you'd think that would minimise the stakes massively, but his pathetic nature only makes him more unnerving. You're not scared of him as he presents himself, you more feel sorry for him to some extent, because he's just a kid and he's such a try-hard loser. But he's a loser capable of lashing out. And there's a real life precedent for that being an incredibly dangerous thing. And examining that, in my opinion, makes for some really interesting horror. But I wouldn't blame you if you found this kid too unbearably cringe to watch, because God, he fucking sucks! Straight from the get-go, and he only gets worse. If you think you can stomach that though, along with some of the genuinely uncomfortable acts of misogyny, this is, in my opinion, such a compelling character study of an often all too real tragic reality. And it just so happens that it succeeds at being that, while also being wrapped up and decorated as a tinsel-tinged tongue-in-cheek terror that's surprisingly tonally upbeat despite its core theme. And that is Better Watch Out. Not to be confused with last week's film, Christmas Evil, which chances are, depending on your copy when you boot it up, will also be called Better Watch Out. Seriously, what is it with all of these films having name changes? Well, regardless, that about does it for today's Killer Christmas episode. But don't worry, there's still one more treat to come for you before the big day. So join me once more next week on Christmas Eve, same time, same place, for one last video for the holidays. Until then, if you're feeling the spirit of giving creeping up on you like a demon in the night, then be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to my Only Dans by hitting that red subscribe button below, and if you're feeling really generous and want to massively support the channel, then check out the Patreon in the description. See you next time!